Hey guys, welcome to session number 53 of the Trailer Music Composers Podcast. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. Release. One man with one microphone who used to collect old coins. Welcome to the Trailer Music Composers Podcast. Hey guys, welcome to another session of the Trailer Music Composers Podcast. I have a really special one today. I'm pretty sure I say that every time I have a guest on, but this time it is special because it's different. This guest is not a composer, well, not by their first trade anyway, not a music supervisor. This guest is Jeremy Van Hoy. He is a bass brass player for the Colorado Springs Orchestra, Symphony Orchestra. And I say bass brass, his primary instrument is bass trombone, but he plays other bass brass instruments too. And the reason I got Jeremy on, is because we got working together because he was playing some parts for me for Elephant Music's album Throat 5. And we had a little Zoom call, just kind of going over a couple of things before I kind of set him to work on what I wanted from him for the album. And it was a lot of fun. And, just talking about the ranges of the instrument, comfortable ranges, the effects and things like that. I thought, this is great. I know who will love this. My nerdy audience from the Trailer Music Composers Podcast. And that's what I did. I asked Jeremy, I said, do you want to be on the podcast? Because I think actually my audience, my listeners will get a great deal out of it. And the episode is fantastic. We get to hear Jeremy play, and I must apologise because I record over Zoom, and the audio quality isn't great generally anyway, but whilst Jeremy is playing, demonstrating, it cuts out, which is really frustrating. But you get the picture, you guys are forgiving. Done is better than perfect, as I often say. So this is kind of like me kind of showing to you, like, actually, when we're writing for brass, perhaps we should write, specifically bass brass, perhaps we should think about what we're writing a little bit more. Do we just have to do the bohms on the octave of the root note? Can we think of this more interesting way to write? Can we think and remind ourselves that at the end of the day, there may be a player who will have to play this, and can we make their life more easy and more interesting by also making our compositions maybe more interesting? It's a really fantastic interview. There's so many fantastic bits in it that I think you guys are going to get a lot out of. I do hope you enjoy. I have spoken. Welcome to the Trailer Music Composers Podcast. Jeremy, so lovely to have you here.
My pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah, mate. Thanks for taking the time. Now, I'm really, really excited about this interview because it's off the beaten track for my show. My show is usually either me having a sort of solo rant about something or having music supervisors or other composers on. And today, I have a bass brass specialist, which is awesome. And listeners, just so you know the story here, I'd been put in touch with Jeremy to record some stuff for Elephant Music's Throat 5. And also we did some sampling as well, didn't we? So specific to kind of create my own instruments to use for Throat 5 and onwards. And in the kind of chat me and Jeremy had, we started talking, and then Jeremy said, well, do you want me to get the instruments out? And all of a sudden, he was just doing this wonderful showcase of the instruments, which was fantastic and a lot of fun for me. So, Jeremy, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are now and how you got there.
Sure. I live in Colorado Springs, which is maybe a city you haven't heard of, but it's the second largest city in Colorado after Denver. So obviously I'm an American and have lived here in America my whole life. Grew up in what we call the Midwest. My hometown is Detroit, very industrial. Maybe it's like your Liverpool or something.
Good reference. Yeah.
All right. Good. So I'm like the Beatles that way. I came from Liverpool and I've gone on to bigger. No, I'm just kidding. Uh, yeah, no, went to music school to study my instruments. I specialize in low brass. I like to call myself a doubler. So a doubler is someone who's just doesn't have one instrument, but really tries to have high level of musicianship on multiple instruments. And I'm happy to demonstrate them today. As I was leaving music school in the Midwest, I was looking for jobs in orchestras. That was definitely my goal in school was to get an orchestra job, which are hard to come by. And at that point, I was really specializing in bass trombone, and there's only one per orchestra. If you think of like tuba, harp, it's just like that, where you have one per symphonic orchestra. So not a lot of openings. When I was leaving school, the only job opening I saw listed was for the Colorado Symphony, and this was back in the 90s. So I was like, okay, let's fly out to Colorado, which is a pretty long haul, and was fortunate enough to win the position to be the one person who got that job right out of school. So I felt so fortunate, and especially fortunate to move to such a beautiful place. Colorado Springs is right in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. And so within 15-minute drive, I can be in the middle of nowhere, hiking, biking. I've really taken up mountain biking as probably my favorite hobby. And Colorado is just perfect for that. And then Denver, being a bigger city, has been great because it's only an hour away, and I do lots of freelance work up there, opera, ballet, and other regional orchestras in Denver. So I've made a life as a classical musician, and thankfully I've also been teaching along the way. I have a private studio, and I teach at a local college called Colorado College. Funny enough,
Whoop.
the Tigers.
Yeah.
And I'm the band director at Colorado College and teach privately over there. And that's been during the pandemic. My saving grace is to have the teaching work that's been steady, and I'm fortunate to have many jobs, and the teaching has been uninterrupted throughout this entire crisis. I've been performing a little bit, and very thankful for the freelance work that composers like you have offered me, because so much of my performing work just dried up overnight in March. So that's been a struggle, but I'm happy to see the vaccines coming in and looking for all of us to get back to normal as soon as possible.
Bring on that normal life, right?
Yes.
So I'm just curious, right? You kind of skimmed over one of the things I find most interesting about the musical journey. You kind of, when did you know that you wanted to firstly be a musician and secondly be like, hey, you know what, bass trombone is going to be my bag? When did you decide that?
That was not one of those light bulb moments. That's kind of a life journey question. I always enjoyed playing music as during my schooling. I probably started playing euphonium when I was 8 years old.
Wow.
My mom got me into lessons, and I just always enjoyed playing. Found myself being one of the better musicians as I was growing up. Through high school, I added trombone to be in the jazz band, which was a lot of fun. And the thing about euphonium and trombone is they have the same mouthpiece. So that's a natural double. But I only picked up the trombone to play jazz for fun. And over the space of 8 years, the trombone slowly took over my life because there's so many opportunities for that instrument. When you talk about orchestra, jazz, brass quintet, the euphonium is just so limited. And I love your country because it really respects the euphonium and puts it on the pedestal it deserves with the brass band tradition that you have. But it's just not the case in America. I was looking at, a few military band jobs in Washington, D.C. on the euphonium as a possibility, but still very competitive. And I just really enjoyed trombone. So I was playing both instruments simultaneously and kind of seeing that light at the end of the tunnel as being trombone centric, and picking up bass trombone in college during music school and really enjoying that part in the orchestra where I played with the tuba, played with the basses and cello, and find that my part is often better than the tenor trombones that are playing the higher or better parts. Yeah, the bass trombone's a really special voice in the orchestra, and as you know, it's well used in movie scoring for effect. And I love that. I love having that voice that you can identify when you're playing. So during music school, I kind of slowly morphed into a bass trombonist. And I think if there was any light bulb moment as I was leaving my undergraduate in Michigan, I was accepted into the Tanglewood Music Center, which is the summer home of the Boston Symphony. They have a student orchestra that's quite elite, I would say, for people in their early 20s. And I was accepted into that summer orchestra and felt like, wow, if I can make it into this youth orchestra that is so difficult to get into, maybe I have a professional future. And then it wasn't but a year later that I won the position in Colorado that brought me here.
Wow. I just want to highlight something again. You haven't mentioned this, but I think it's worth noting that for the trailer composers in the audience who don't really understand the rigors of becoming not just a session musician, but a classical musician in an orchestra, those seats are incredibly competitive, and to get your chops up to that standard takes a huge amount of work. I mean, I'm sure you're nodding in agreement with me here. I mean, I've only I've spoken to quite a few people who've done it, and the hours of practice. I mean, how many hours were you putting in at the time to get to that stage?
I just love to play my instrument. I love to practice and perform. So I certainly wasn't counting hours, but it was many, 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 many in the practice room, solitary work, where you're trying to polish your presentation, your performing ability to separate yourself from the crowd of other applicants and be that one person that is awarded the job, which creates a career. It's incredible. And the pressure is almost mind-boggling, but at the time it was more about the love of the music and the love of performing on your instrument that got me through.
See, I love that you said that, because I'm always harping on about, like, it's so important that the stuff you're writing lights the fire inside, because if it doesn't, at some point you're going to run out of the energy and the motivation to keep doing it. And
Oh, it happens all the time in the music business. I'm sure you've seen it. I've seen it, where that fire does go out, and those are the people you just don't want to be around. They're going to drag you down with their negativity. And if you don't love music or enjoy producing music, then find another career, because there's plenty of people who do.
Yes. So also, I'm really interested to see what the interview process was, because I mean, I've heard some horror stories about the interview process for some of the seats in the London orchestras. They sound terrifying. I mean, was it the same for you, or was it like, play me a piece?
I think in America we have a pretty defined process where you apply for an opening and they say, we would like to listen to you on this date, and here are the pieces of music we would like you to prepare. And so they're excerpts from standard orchestral literature. You're talking your Wagner, Strauss, Rossini, even going back to Haydn. There's trombone excerpts, and they'll, weeks in advance, what you're supposed to be working on and preparing. So the idea is that there's not going to be a lot of surprises when you go to the audition. It's certainly a live audition, but then they put up a screen so that all applicants are not seen, and that reduces any bias towards, around gender or race. That they want to have a level playing field for all applicants, and just based on listening only. So I had the screen. I played on stage in the concert hall, but could not see my judges, as it were. And they when you play, they can ask you questions. Could you play that again a little louder? Of course.
Could you speak up? There's a screen. Oh no, I'm just saying, like, when
Right,
you're there, like,
exactly.
sorry, I can't hear you. There's a screen in the way. So that sounds like a great.
Yeah,
That sounds like a game. That sounds like a game show. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. And I think if you can get on a roll, if you can get comfortable in that situation, which is full of pressure, but what you're trained for in music school, if you can get on a roll, which I did, you can be that last man or woman standing when they take the screen down and offer you the job, and that's a great feeling. Believe me. A little anecdote I'll add on to that is after I won the job, I went back to the airport to fly home. But before I got in the airplane, I called my dad and I said, "Hey, guess what?" "Well, what, Jeremy?" "I won the job." And there was about 10, 15 seconds of silence. And then I started hearing him weeping on the
Oh,
phone.
nice.
And he could barely talk. He was so proud and so happy for me that I had this journey through music school, much of which he had funded, of course. And here I, in my early 20s, had won that position. He was so overwhelmed, and I'll never forget that moment.
That is a nice, touching moment, a nice, proud dad moment.
Yes. Well, now I'm a father, and
Yeah.
I'm expecting to have several of those down the road myself.
Yeah. You mean proud dad moments, right? Yeah.
As
Yeah.
opposed to dad joke moments.
Yeah. Oh, well, they're all over the place.
Yeah.
No, well, I know there's lots of dads in the audience probably sort of thinking, "Oh, go on, my boy." So I'm, yeah. What a lovely. I think that's a lovely point to kind of end the story there, because now we know where you are. You're playing in the orchestra, and you get this call from this. I was going to say nutty professor, nutty composer about sampling some bass trombone. Now, one of the things I was so keen to get across to the audience was not like a lesson, but like an expose on the brass instruments, because we all sit there, and I have to say, just so you know, Jeremy, all trailer composers bloody love the bass trombone. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, thank you very much. There we go. So we're all big fans of your work, and the
Right.
rest of the family. Um, I kind of want to. I would like you to kind of explain what instruments you play. So you've mentioned the euphonium, you've mentioned the bass trombone. What other instruments are in the bass brass family?
Sure, and I'm happy to demonstrate those today.
Fab.
Euphonium's kind of the baby tuba. I've got one on my lap here. So this is, yes.
Yep, I see it. Would you want to give us a little? I don't. I would say Bram, but that just seems too simple. Just brr, it's going to sound like that, isn't it? Give us a little rendition of something on the
Yes,
euphonium.
I've prepared something for you,
Oh, you
Rich, and
legend!
this is from an English composer named Philip Spark, who's a big name in the brass band world, and his solo for euphonium called Pantomime.
Amazing. Lovely. Now the thing is, as us trailer composers, honestly, we don't really. There aren't many euphonium libraries for us to use. So it's actually nice to hear the euphonium. I mean, I've worked with the euphonium before, but only sparingly. Um,
I think it's a special instrument. It's often called the cello of the band. It's got a beautiful lyrical voice in that baritone register, and completely underused, I think, in film scoring. It could be identified with a male character, for example, or even an important animal in a story that gives it kind of a soulful persona.
well, I think it's. I can totally hear the analogy there of it being the cello in the band, cello of the band, because it has a lovely kind of wistful nostalgia to the sound, especially the way you just played it. Obviously, if you're like, it would be very different, right? Yeah. There we go. Yeah, there's that wistful nostalgia. There it is. But yeah, so you said the euphonium is the kind of baby tuba. So Australian composers, we know the tuba, right? We use the tuba all the time, and we when we're doing our orchestral and hybrid stuff. And the sad thing, I think, for me is that I kind of treat the tuba with a little disrespect. I always just let it play the root notes. I mean, what's your experience of playing the tuba? On
I
the
do have
other
some
end.
experience. Yeah, I'm sorry. Um, I think the tuba is also a very special instrument, and is unfortunately stereotyped. Um, but I think if you listen to the usage by John Williams in the Star Wars trilogies and the Home Alone film, he treats the tuba as a solo instrument and will put it higher in its tessitura and give it some pretty virtuosic melodic writing. And this, I think, is effective because the tuba is not a piercing instrument like, say, a trumpet or oboe. It would allow you to have a melody that stays in the background and not get too in the face or in the ears of your listener. So I think the tuba should be allowed to branch out from its standard, you know, carry the root job that you mentioned, which is
Yeah.
typical.
Yeah, and also it's carrying the root or just being the kind of the underpin beneath the French horns. Oh,
Yeah,
we need an octave below the horns. Oh, tuba. There we go. Boom.
right. I want to talk about the idea of the pad. Um, I think that's pretty standard practice for film composers to have a string pad or a brass pad if something's a little thicker, and that certainly works and maybe sounds really nice in your studio, but from the performer's perspective, it's kind of an eye roll moment for us. You know, to see a part that's a series of whole notes. Do you guys say whole notes in England?
We have unfortunately have had to adapt the rest of the world's use of the language. We can't just say semi-breve and expect everybody to know what we're talking about.
I certainly wouldn't know what you're talking about.
Well, excuse me, don't play a breve, sir. Well, I play a what? Yeah, yes,
So
yeah, I do know what you're talking about. Yeah.
great. So whole notes are our derogatory term is a series of footballs, and that's American football, where you just have a bunch of whole notes in succession, and it's just not fun to play. It's tiring for the musician. You know, we want to have something interesting. We want to bring out a melody or a counter melody or some kind of rhythmic motif that is propelling the music. And the sound of a brass pad, like I said, may sound great in your studio. And of course, if someone is paying me to play whole notes, I will do that. But I look for composers to be a little more creative, to let the musician express him or herself a little bit better.
Okay. Right. So first of all, I just want to put a caveat to this that you have essentially just said that you would eye roll quite happily at 90% of my music, Jeremy. So I'm insulted, sir. That's what I'm joking. I'm joking. Because it sounds great in my studio. That's why. I mean, this is great. Have you got a tuba with you?
I do not.
Okay. Well, let's pretend the euphonium is your tuba, right?
Great.
So, tell us what's the lowest note of the register, the lowest comfortable note of in the euphonium's register?
Sure. There's the pedal range, which are kind of the extreme blatty low notes, and I can get down to probably C, which would sound like. Imagine the first note of Strauss's also Sprach,
Yeah, so
right?
I don't get that reference, but I'm sure somebody in my audience is going, oh yeah, I know that one. But so the pedal notes, that's pretty much the way that we write for brass. A lot of us composers, unless we're dealing with family adventure, which is when we get to be a little bit more lyrical with our brass writing. And even then, it's, come on, brass, just do your job of bombing for now. I don't mean any disrespect at all. I'm just talking about, unfortunately, there's a convention in trailer music that we often all fall into. So let's go the A above that drops that C. If you could just play me, you've got the A descending to a G, descending to an F, descending to an E. Just
Sure.
that. Play it as whole notes.
That's the bottom of the range, but those notes are fun, and I understand why you enjoy them because of the tonal color as well as sometimes power that can be produced from those pitches.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean that's the other thing. Like it's so easy for us to forget that there are players playing this stuff.
Mhm.
And for most of us, we don't get the chance to go out to an orchestra or have session players playing this stuff. But I guarantee for those of you who do get the opportunity, it's quite a shock, and you do get the eye rolls from the players when you give them a sheet of hull notes to play. Here you go, brass players, hull notes, please. And in fact, just before we started the interview, I was telling Jeremy about a time when I was doing a recording with a London orchestra, and I ran out of time to. It was a 35 piece, so it wasn't a big orchestra. String section, brass section, wind. I had 3 trumpet players. I ran out of time to put their parts into Visi, so separate their parts. And in fact, I think I put it in the wrong clef. I don't think I transposed it for them. Yeah, Jeremy's pulling a face. And I thought to myself, it's whole notes. In fact, actually, no, it's quarter notes they were playing. They were playing quarter notes throughout this. And yes, it was fast, but they're playing quarter notes. I'm just going to give them the triad stack because that's what they're playing in triads, moving around in thirds. And I put the sheet down in front of the trumpet players, and they all look up at me. And the first trumpet looks at me and goes, "What are we supposed to do with that?" I'll say, "Well, you're trumpet 1, so you play the top note, and you're trumpet 2, so you do the middle one. You're trumpet 3, you do the bottom one." And they looked at me and they was like, "Can you not transpose this for us and separate it out?" And I said, "Well, I could, but I've run out of time." And as you said, Jeremy, I almost heard their eyes rolling. It was
Right.
yeah.
Rolling around in the sockets there. Yeah, I mean, what you did is entirely possible to perform and perform at a high level. You're just making it a little bit harder for them, and I think you probably found the crustier trumpet section in London there.
Yeah, yeah. What do you expect me to do? Give you the parts to your, position? I think the thing is because I used to do session work myself as a guitarist, and I would sit next to the saxophone players. It was usually a rock and roll band or a jazz band. I'd sit next to the sax players, and I'd see them sight reading in different clefs.
Hmm.
So it would be actually written a tone, or even like a tone or a minor third up, and they would in their head transpose it down a minor third and play that note on their saxophone. It blew my mind. So then there's me saying these trumpet players will be fine playing in A minor. Plop. But yes. But the thing is, the point there, as you've rightly said, is it's so easy to forget that there are players playing this stuff. And when you write this stuff and then you finally get a publisher who says, let's go and record this, you suddenly have to be made aware of how your writing fits. So we have our descending line that you just played, Jeremy. The A, G, F, E. Now, you said you would like something that's more rhythmical in nature or more lyrical, perhaps. So let's go for the rhythmical thing. Because, that register, we're probably not going to be giving you anything particularly lyrical, unless it's just a counter melody bouncing around or something like that. So how would we approach that to give it a more rhythmical part for the players? I know that's not the end goal for us as composers, but it's an interesting take.
Yeah, I think that's where the composer can add some personality and take that whole note and find perhaps a rhythmic groove, even if it's legato, that adds a little bit of propulsion in the music and therefore engages the musician a little bit. So I could demonstrate. I'll just take it an octave higher, so it'll be easier to produce. But
Yep.
here's an example. So that's now you got a little bit of energy in that whole note.
So what you're essentially saying is treat each line that you write as if it is a melody line, a line in and of itself taken out of the music.
Right. I think composers would maybe rely upon the percussion or rhythm section to create all of that propulsion and just want sound from the brass. And I'm saying, no, we can do both.
Nice. Okay, well, let's move on to the bass trombone. So you started on your euphonium, and then the temptations of the bass trombone became too much.
Absolutely.
Can we hear a little example of the bass trombone, showing its lowest register, its highest register, and then everything in between? I'm not saying like as Jeremy just raised his eyebrows then.
That's a nice gnarly pedal F, and hopefully you got a clean sound there.
We did get a clean sound, yep.
So that's something, you're getting some energy in your trailer. Here comes the bad guy, or here comes the spaceship, and the bass trombone can announce that arrival. And of course, there's many octaves above that, so we can go up to. So that was F, 4 ledger lines below the bass clef, and then I can play the F in the treble clef.
That's very loud.
1 second.
So yeah, that's the thing. Like you don't as a composer, you get into a kind of a rut using samples that you forget the registers that these instruments can achieve. I would never think to myself, oh, that register is going to be perfect for the bass trombone.
Well, sure, because there's tenor trombones, there's French horns that would be considered the mid range for, and you want your performer to be comfortable. But I've spent many years developing my range to be as flexible as possible. So maybe I'm the only trombonist on a scoring session, and I'm expected to play all over the instrument because I'm the only one. Well, I should be prepared to do that. So up into the treble clef.
It's really nice to hear that side of bass brass. Like I said, because we just fall into the habit of partially because it's something that is expected of certain types of trailing music to just kind of go, like you said, in the pedal, like the but it's really nice to hear the melody side of it. And the one thing I would say for us as a composer, I often avoid that sort of aspect of brass because it has such a military connotation. And it often, like a lot of solo cello stuff, and perhaps the oboe as well, has a sadness. Even when it's playing something quite lighthearted, for me, there's a sadness in that.
Right. Trombones or low brass are never characterized as heroic. That's usually saved for the French horns or trumpets. And that's the history of the instrument. That's going back to ancient times when we're going to war and you're going to announce the army with your trumpets. You didn't do that with tubas because the sound didn't carry. It wasn't fearsome. And so the trombones tend to have that supporting role. But the fact is that we can play melodically and we can have that baritone register singing voice that's just so underutilized. I would refer your listeners to Mahler's Third Symphony, one of his epic productions, and almost the entire first movement is carried by solo trombone, playing loudly, quietly, lyrically, powerfully. It's just an incredible demonstration of that instrument's potential, and that music was written well over 100 years ago, probably 120 years ago.
And actually, in fact, I think generally listening to Mahler's music for orchestral writing is a very good suggestion. Yeah, great call that actually. Actually, one of the things you're talking about the French horns and the trumpets being heroic, but actually, and this is a thing I think you mentioned this in the last call, and I think composers should be aware that not the bass trombone, but the trombone can and very easily does carry the heroic line, carry the melody, carry the top line of the brass section. It's got the right sort of bite to cut through, and it's got a lovely bright tone. So, could you give us a very, very simple, straightforward example of, I mean, even playing the Star Wars theme, just because I love the Star Wars theme, but
So I also have a tenor trombone. Would you like to hear that?
oh, let's do it on the tenor trombone, because that's I was talking about the. So he was picking it out by ear, guys. That was making me feel a bit emotional, Jeremy. I was enjoying that.
That was in the vicinity of Star Wars.
Yeah. Okay, yes. So I mean, that was just a kind of very small, very quick example of the trombone taking the top line in the brass. It doesn't always have to be the horns. I think the horns get a lot of the attention because they can play with a bit of grit in that register as well. I think, at least we hear it as grit. I believe it's called cuivre, isn't it? Where the notes sort of split a little.
Right. That's a brassiness that trombones are entirely capable of doing as well. I think once you put a couple Fs in the part, maybe two Fs, ask for fortissimo, you're gonna probably get some of that grit you're looking for from a trombonist because we do not shy away from loud playing. Let's put it that way.
No, that's great. Okay, so I'm quite keen to kind of lean on your experience uh, as a session player. What common mistakes do you see in writing for low brass that you think would be good for my audience to kind of take on board?
Well, you want to know what the comfortable registers are and what the extreme registers are, and they're different for every instrument. When you talk about tuba, bass trombone, tenor trombone, each of those has individual mid ranges and then individual extreme lows and highs. And you want to hang out in that comfortable mid range as much as possible for the musician to be happy and producing their best sounds, but certainly don't be afraid of those extremes if you use them sparingly, is what I would say. You don't want to have someone hanging out in their high register for a minute or two straight. They're just gonna the fatigue will creep in.
So what? Just clarify. When you say fatigue, you mean lip fatigue, right?
Yes, exactly. That we can only play continuously for so much, and that time is shrunk when you're playing in the high range.
Okay, this is really interesting because any of you who've done anyone in the audience who has done work with live orchestras will know that your time with the brass is limited. We can't be doing back-to-back sessions with the brass, and that's interesting. Is that, I mean, is that fatigue only in the top end of the register, or does it happen? Can you only play for a certain amount of time in
Yeah,
any
there's
type of
fatigue.
playing?
There's certainly fatigue in any register. It's just going to be shrunk that dramatically by playing in the high range, and that's why you as a composer want to know where is that high range on the instrument, and don't take those notes out of the equation. Just use them for that special effect, for that climax or that heroic moment. But if they're playing a brass pad like we spoke of earlier, you definitely want to be in the comfortable mid range.
And what happens when your brass section experience lip fatigue?
Well, you'll hear the tone quality suffer, so it'll become more brittle, softer, and then you'll hear brass players start to miss notes. We call them clams, where you go for a high note and you just play the wrong note. You miss it because the fatigue is not allowing you to produce the note properly.
Does your intonation throughout the registers suffer with lip fatigue?
Absolutely.
Yeah, there we go.
Yes.
Okay, guys. So if any of you are going to be doing brass sessions in the future, think about how much time you're giving them in each register, and also think about how much time you're going to be paying them to play, because you want to basically get them to play the best parts first and the hardest parts first, so that the easier parts throughout the session are less straining. Jeremy is nodding, so which I'm very pleased to see.
Yes, I think you've got it all figured out, Rich. So bravo to you. I think some of your best brass playing may be quite early in that recording session, and that's where you want to throw some of the big moments at them. Make sure your part writing includes some rests. We like to see a little bit of time to take the mouthpiece off of our lips in mid section, as it were. Again, if I see a full page of music with no rest, it's like I can do this, but probably once or twice at the most.
Okay, so say for instance, you're assuming that most composers write for low brass in the way that I tend to when I'm doing sort of hybrid stuff, and it will be whole tones with the occasional quarter note, perhaps stepping down, as a passing note or a neighbor tone, whatever. Would it be advisable in those whole tones, rather than it be a whole tone taking up the whole bar, wherever that bar is, 4 or 6 or 5, whatever, to have a what do you call a semi-brief? My brain has just slipped.
Well, yeah, a quarter rest or an eighth rest
Yeah,
will give you a little breathing moment at the end of the measure. That's always welcome. If
fab.
you don't need wall to wall sound, if you're recognizing that we are human beings who need to replenish our air supply,
Yep.
then by all means write it in.
Okay, because I mean, actually, my experience of writing with samples is that I would generally leave a little gap at the end of the brass anyway, uh, more out of habit than anything else, just because I'm thinking about them leaving space between the notes, whether that's because I'm thinking perhaps I'm going to record this with players and they'll need the gap, or perhaps that's just habitual. I'm not sure. Okay, so there's the first piece of advice: is to, in fact, there's a couple of really great pieces of advice there. The first one being limit the amount of time you spend in the top registers. The second one being, if you're recording with brass, you want to get the best out of them in the first part of the session, give them the easier parts later, and to help them with that, make sure that there are rests, even in the sustained sections.
Sure. Yeah, you can also notate that just with a apostrophe breath, but a rest is welcome for sure.
Fab. Okay. Now, a lot of composers don't explore low harmony.
Mm.
Uh, and what I mean by that, is that you've got all of these lovely, rich instruments, but because we're told, or we've heard that we shouldn't muddy the waters with harmonies that are closer than a fifth or an octave in certain registers, we tend not to do it. But there are so many wonderful sounds to be had when you have thirds, seconds, fourths interacting in the lower registers of the brass.
Yes.
Now, have you got any good examples of that where, for instance, in the classical repertoire, where there is actually a lovely section where there is low brass writing that is dense and rich?
Absolutely. I would point you to Prokofiev. I love his music from Romeo and Juliet. Just a masterwork that I've had the good fortune to perform twice in its entirety. And the brass writing is just phenomenal up and down that score. But and other examples as well in his symphonies and what have you, he will take the low brass and pack them a little more densely, harmonically speaking, than the average composer. And it works wonderfully. It's something you should not be afraid of doing because it creates a thickness, a weight that you may want in your score. And I'm talking, major seconds at the bottom of the bass clef. That can be very effective.
Wow. Major seconds. He's getting cheeky.
Well, maybe it's a hit or a couple of hits to create emphasis,
Yep.
and you may be tempted just to have a major triad. But now if you put maybe a tight ninth in there, um, now it's got more like of a hammer effect, of a crunch.
Yeah, because the dissonance, the vibrations between the notes clash, don't they? Oh,
Right? And
that's
then, so in the notation, might write something like SFZ, right? Uh, and then make the harmony quite dense, and trombone will just sink our teeth into that and give you this scary or meaty moment.
so for those people in the audience who aren't familiar with the Italian language, can you tell us what SFZ stands for and what it means, translates to?
Sforzando, which is
Hmm.
a accent, and there's many variations on that, but I love that marking because it clearly says, zing, pop it, emphasis with a lot of air pressure, and get that cuivre sound that you mentioned earlier that jumps out of the texture. I think it's quite exhilarating, and to do that with an added density of harmony is quite powerful.
So that's those type of things that are actually really useful, because also the other thing is, as composers, we get libraries that have articulations separated into separate instances. So most of us reach for longs, legatos, staccatos, you know, just maybe even just those. I mean, I'm guilty of that most of the time. Uh,
Right. It's a palette like any painter. You're holding up a palette up, and what you just mentioned was maybe, black, white, and red. And of course, there's every shade in between that you can access through the Italian language.
yeah, or German or French, depending on how much theory you had to learn. um, now, I'm quite keen to talk about the effects of a bass in brass instrument. We've obviously talked about the ranges. We've talked about sforzando, the kind of the crunchy, warm sound that we love and dearly, and the lovely heroic sound of the tenor trombone. But what about common effects in the bass brass? What I was going to say, what are they? And could you give us some examples, please, sir?
Absolutely. Well, if you're trying to create a melodic line, I would ask for vibrato because that signifies you as a singing voice. And so you would play something like, let me turn the microphone down. Does that come through?
Yeah, I thought for a second you were going to do Leia, the love theme from Star Wars. It
Oh,
starts with it starts with a major six as well. Yeah. Oh
uh,
yeah. Just for those of you with keen ears, you may have noticed that I just hummed the Indiana Jones romance theme rather than Princess Leia's theme. My apologies. Yeah, big time.
my entire family just watched the whole Star Wars sequence in chronological order.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
it
No,
was a special bonding moment for us, and my goodness, if you watch Rogue One and then start Episode 4 immediately, the scenes segue perfectly. It's an incredible cinematic achievement.
did you manage to step the Mandalorian in there as well, or was it just the movies?
I think The Mandalorian was the reason, that we were watching that simultaneously and like, wow, this is a great story.
Great story. Right, before we sidetrack onto the Mandalorian. Okay, so we delivered vibrato. In fact, actually, I'm pretty sure that everyone in the audience is going, love the Mandalorian. This is the way. So let's let's dive into other effects. So vibrato, a common effect that we know and use to make it feel more lyrical and more vocal. You can sometimes say, is it cantabile? Yeah, that's it. To be played like a singer or in a singing voice.
But as a composer, you can specifically ask for vibrato or no vibrato. That's an instruction we're used to seeing. And I think if you want it, you should ask for it and not make any assumptions. You could write dolce or cantabile, but that's not necessarily going to get you vibrato from the musician unless you spell it out.
Okay, yeah. So this was one of my experiences of translating my music to score. Depending on the musician you're working with, some musicians you can basically give them a blank score, no instructions, and kind of just say, "Can you just play it with feeling?" And they just smash it out of the park. Other musicians like to have, and understandably, meticulous direction. Hairpins all over the place. Breath marks. Who'd want breath marks, honestly? But
I think it depends on what you're looking for as a composer. Are you encouraging individuality, or or do you have a clearer picture in your mind of what you want? I think if it's the latter, then it's worth taking the time to spell out every little detail, because that's what we're trained to do, is bring those things off the page.
Nice, and there are the hours and hours of practice coming through there. So yeah, I'm keen to get into another effect, which we dived into for Throat 5, which was flutter tongue.
I love flutter tongue. It's an effect that not all brass players can execute well, to be honest. But I love it, and I think it'd be very effective to put a burr on the sound to make something sound even scarier or more excited. So I'll demonstrate that.
Yes, love that. Sounds great. It is kind of that quiver sound we talked about, isn't it? That kind of like breaking of the tone. It's
Absolutely. It's I'm taking my tongue and fluttering it, which creates this oscillation, and just really gives life to the sound. I wouldn't overuse it. It's a special effect that should be used sparingly for those moments. I don't want to play a series of whole notes that are flutter tongue.
yeah. There's that warning. Don't tire them out, guys. Yeah, no, I really like that one, and also I respect that because I can't do that with my tongue.
Right.
Yeah,
It's genetics.
yeah, that's it. Yeah, of course. It's like curling your tongue, isn't it? You either can or you can't. It's fact. Okay, now the other one is, see, I like to do this as a man who whistles badly on a daily basis. But that's, creating a tone and then humming at the same time, which for me sounds like a spaceship, and is a great way to distract a crying baby, just in case you're wondering. Now, tell the audience what that is called, and can you give us an example of that on the trombone?
Sure, this is called multiphonics, where I would be playing and singing at the same time. Of course, that allows for some harmonic possibilities, and it's certainly an advanced skill. I think it's hard to use in the ensemble setting, much more effective in a solo setting, based on my experience. I'd be curious to see some composers try to implement multiphonics in an ensemble setting. I think it'd be difficult, but
How would you notate multiphonics? Would you just say, give them a straight direction, multiphonics, hum the tune, or hum a semitone out, or
I think what I've seen is the note I played would be notated normally, and then the sung pitch would be a diamond shaped note.
oh, like a harmonic.
Yeah.
Ah, wait. So you then have to read the sung pitch, sing that, then produce the other pitch. That blows my mind.
Easier said than done. Let me see if I can demonstrate some of that for your audience.
Yes, and just so you know, Jeremy, I used the multiphonics we recorded extensively. I put it through a roto cabinet, so I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. It's great. In fact, actually, I should send you a link of the stuff I did just so you can hear it. Yeah, I mean, I love hearing players play, especially if you give them a piece that you've written, even if it's a simple melody. A player playing something you've written, there's some magic in that. One of my first experiences was my violin teacher was also teaching me how to orchestrate. He was a specialist in folk wind instruments, usually ethnic, and he had this wonderful little clarinet. I don't know where it's from. It sounded kind of like a sexy duduk, you know. It was great.
A klezmer instrument, perhaps?
It could have been. He did. He specialised in klezmer, so it could have been. But I wrote this line that I'd orchestrated with an orchestra, and he played it to me. And writing it on paper and then having someone play it,
Well,
yeah,
of course, he injected his humanness into what you had written, and that humanness involves all the years and all the experiences that he's accumulated up to that point to make music. And so the human factor cannot be reproduced. You know, it's just unique to us.
yeah, it's awesome. So I have really, really enjoyed chatting, Jeremy, and I really appreciate you taking the time to play to us, to explain this stuff, and to be a guest on the show. Is there anything you would like to say, or share one piece of advice, or as no pressure? You just feel like watch The Mandalorian. It's a great show,
Well, no, I'll say a couple of things. I want to thank you, Rich, for having me. I really respect the work you're doing, and appreciate that you reached out to me across the pond, as it were, multiple times. So thank you, Rich, first of all.
You're welcome.
I think a piece of advice I give my students is there's no substitute for hard work. That you can have all the talent in the world, but if you're not ready to sit down and put pencil to paper or work on your laptop, that there's no substitute for hard work. I also believe that hard work is generally rewarded. So if you're willing to make those efforts, good things will happen to you. And I guess the last thing I'll mention is that another film my family watched recently is called Soul. It's the new film from Pixar, yes, and it features a young lady on the trombone who plays with lots of soul, even though she's a minor character. That really caught my eye and ear as a teacher and trombonist. Film to all your listeners and viewers.
Yeah, I thought of you when I saw that. I was like, trombone. Yeah,
Cool.
that film is lovely. As a musician, you should watch that film. That's great. Anyway, is there anywhere that my listeners can get hold of you if they want to have a bass trombonist on their queue or whatever?
Have you heard of this thing called Facebook?
What?
What is this thing?
Yeah.
Well, please share my name. It's fairly unique, a Dutch name. So I think if you search Jeremy Van Hoy on Facebook, you'll see me with a trombone in my hand, and you can reach out to me that way.
Ace, yeah. Jeremy's name will be in the footnotes of the show anyway.
Headline.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah. Not on the title, just in the footnotes. Bass trombone steals the show. That's
Always.
Oh, dude, thank you so much. It's been awesome.
My pleasure. Have a great evening there in London.
Yes. Okay, so that's the interview. I hope you guys got a lot out of it. As ever, thank you so much for listening, guys. You are absolute legends. Week in, week out, you download my podcast, which is such wonderful news. and I love it. Thank you. And it's going down a treat. So if you could do me this one favour, please, and leave a review on whatever platform. Ideally, it'll be iTunes. That's where most of my downloads come from. Head on over to iTunes, give me a rating, and leave a written review. It really does make a huge difference to how many people find me and how many find me, not me personally, how many people find the podcast and how easily they find the podcast. So if you can spare me just a minute to a minute and a half of your time to write a little review of the podcast so that people stumbling upon it can at least know what they're in for. As ever, have a lovely week, chaps. If you want to learn more about the Trailer Music School, head on over to thetrailermusicschool.com, where you can join my trailer music courses and master the art of trailer music. See you later, chaps.